What if the person you trust the most is the one who betrays you in the worst way possible? On August 20, 2017, in the early morning hours, a chilling 911 call shattered the silence of a quiet Texas neighborhood. A man lay bleeding in the driveway of a friend's house, his wife screaming beside him, panic written all over her face. The victim? Randall Stuart, a husband, a father, a man who had no idea that this night would be his last. His wife, Leria Hastings, claimed she had no idea what had happened. One minute, they were looking for his lost phone, and the next, he was clutching his chest, blood pouring onto the pavement. She sobbed, she pleaded, she insisted she had nothing to do with it. But when detectives arrived, things didn't add up. Leria's story was full of holes, and every time she tried to explain, the inconsistencies grew. Was this just a tragic accident? A random act of violence? Or was the killer much closer than anyone realized? Tonight, we take a deep dive into a case of love, betrayal, and deception, where a wife thought she could outsmart the police, but she was dead wrong. What if the person you trust the most is the one who holds the knife? It was the early morning hours of August 20, 2017, in the quiet town of Lubbock, Texas. The streets were dark, the air still heavy from the lingering heat of a summer night. Most people were asleep, unaware that just a few blocks away, something horrifying was about to happen. At 5:50 a.m., a chilling 911 call shattered the silence. The voice on the other end was frantic, desperate. "He's bleeding. There's blood everywhere. Please, hurry." When officers arrived, they found Randall Stuart, a 33-year-old husband and father, lying motionless in the driveway of a friend's house. His hands clutched his chest, his shirt soaked in blood. Kneeling beside him was Leria Hastings, his wife, hysterical. Tears streamed down her face as she rocked back and forth, screaming his name. But something was off. The scene was chaotic, but Leria's reactions felt too rehearsed. There was fear, yes, but was it fear of losing her husband, or fear of something else? Paramedics rushed Randall to the hospital, but his injuries were severe. He had lost too much blood. Despite their efforts, at 6:15 a.m., Randall was pronounced dead. And just like that, what started as a regular night out had turned into a murder investigation. Leria, still trembling, was the only witness. She claimed she had no idea what had happened. According to her, Randall had gone outside to look for his phone, and when she followed him out, she heard yelling. Then, suddenly, he was stabbed. But who did it? And why? The police weren't convinced. Something about Leria's story didn't sit right. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses saw anyone else at the scene. And yet, Randall was stabbed, and the only person with him was Leria. Could this have been a random attack? A case of mistaken identity? Or was the truth far more chilling? As detectives began their investigation, one thing became painfully clear: Leria Hastings was hiding something. And they were about to find out exactly what. When someone is innocent, their story stays the same. But when they're guilty, the lies start piling up. As detectives sat across from Leria Hastings, they knew they had to tread carefully. She was the only witness, the only person who could explain how Randall Stuart ended up bleeding out in a friend's driveway. But something about her didn't sit right. Her tears, her panic, it all felt too controlled, too calculated. At first, Leria told a simple story. She and Randall had been out drinking. They went to their friend Julia's house to sleep. Randall went outside to look for his phone. She heard yelling, then suddenly, Randall was stabbed. A mystery man ran away into the darkness. That was it. No motive, no warning, no explanation. But detectives weren't buying it. Who was this mystery man? Why did no one else see him? So they pressed harder. And that's when Leria's story started to change. First, she claimed she couldn't see the attacker's face. It was too dark. But then, she said he was a little shorter than Randall and probably black. Next, she insisted Randall was arguing with someone on the phone. But how could he be arguing on the phone and getting stabbed by a stranger at the same time? Then, detectives noticed something odd. She kept adding pointless details, like the way she parked her car, the fact that another car had pulled out of a driveway, or how she knocked on her phone to unlock it. Why would someone go into that much detail, unless they were trying to distract from the truth? The more questions they asked, the more tangled her lies became. At one point, she even claimed that Randall had enemies, someone had once threatened him over a woman. But when asked for names, she had none. One thing was clear, Leria was desperate to shift the blame onto someone, anyone, but herself. And the detectives? They weren't letting her off that easy. At this point, the detectives knew one thing for certain, Leria Hastings was lying. The inconsistencies in her story were glaring. One minute, she claimed there was a mystery attacker. The next, she insisted Randall was arguing on the phone. She couldn't keep her own version of events straight. But they weren't ready to confront her just yet. Instead, they decided to let her talk, to see how far she would go. Leria, you're the only person who saw what happened. We just need the truth. She wiped her eyes and nodded, playing the grieving widow. I told you everything, she sniffled. I don't know who that man was. The detectives leaned forward. Then why did no one else see him? Leria hesitated. Then, as if grasping at straws, she blurted out, maybe they were in the house. Maybe they didn't hear it. The problem? They did hear it. The people inside the house heard yelling, but not a single one of them saw another man outside. And then, the detectives pulled out their trump card. Leria. Randall is dead. Silence. Her breath hitched, her fingers curled into fists. This was the moment of truth. Would she break down in genuine grief? Would she show the raw, unfiltered pain of losing her husband? Instead, she paused. Not the reaction they expected. Oh my God, she finally whispered. No, no, no. She buried her face in her hands, but something about it felt forced. The detectives exchanged a glance. They had seen real grief before. And this? This wasn't it. They pushed further. Leria, we know you're hiding something. She shook her head violently. No. I swear. I don't know. But the cracks in her performance were already showing. Because there was one undeniable fact in this case, the only person who had the chance to stab Randall, was Leria herself. And they were about to prove it. Leria Hastings thought she was in control. She thought her tears, her panic, her carefully crafted lies would be enough to fool detectives. But now, the walls were closing in. Detectives had given her every chance to tell the truth. They had listened to her shifting stories, her contradictions, her sudden bursts of emotion that felt just a little too forced. And now, they were done waiting. Leria, you know what happens if you lie to us, right? One detective said, his voice slow and deliberate. This is a sworn statement. If you lie, that's perjury. Her breath quickened. She licked her lips. She was nervous. I'm not lying, she protested. But they weren't letting up. You told us Randall was on the phone. But then you said he was arguing with a man in person. Then you said you didn't see anyone. Which one is it? Leria's fingers curled into fists. She was trapped. I don't know. Maybe I got confused. It all happened so fast. The detectives exchanged a glance. They had seen this exact behavior before. The more someone tries to explain away their lies, the guiltier they become. Then, the lead detective leaned in. Leria, did you stab Randall? Her entire body went still. Her eyes darted around the room. She knew. They knew. And for the first time since the interrogation started, she had nothing to say. Leria Hastings had run out of time. For hours, she had tried to weave a story that would make sense. She cried, she denied, she contradicted herself at every turn. But now, the detectives had presented her with something she couldn't argue against: evidence. No footprints. No fingerprints. No sign of a mystery attacker. The only person near Randall when he was stabbed was her. Detective leaned in, his voice calm but firm. "Leria, why don't you just tell us what happened?" She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped non-existent tears from her cheeks. "I swear. I didn't do it," she whispered. "Then who did?" the detective shot back. "Who else could have?" Silence. Leria opened her mouth. Paused. Then, in an act of sheer desperation, she made one last attempt to save herself. "Randall, he was drunk. Maybe he fell on something. Maybe it was an accident." The room went dead silent. The detectives stared at her, disbelief flashing in their eyes. An accident? Randall had been stabbed directly in the chest. The wound was deep, precise. This wasn't the kind of injury that happened from simply falling on something. She was lying. Again. But this time, the detectives weren't entertaining her stories anymore. They pushed back from the table. One officer stepped out of the room, and moments later, returned with a stack of papers. "Leria, this is the medical examiner's report." The detective slid it across the table. Randall was stabbed with a knife. A sharp blade. Straight into his chest. This was no accident. Leria's eyes darted toward the paper, but she didn't touch it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. She was trapped. And now? The only thing left was for her to admit it. But would she? And just like that, the game was over. Leria Hastings was arrested and charged with aggravated assault, later accepting a plea deal that sentenced her to 10 years in prison. But for Randall Stuart's family, justice felt incomplete. They believed Leria had intentionally taken his life, and that a decade behind bars was not enough. This case raises difficult questions. What drives a person to betray the one they once loved? Was this an act of self-defense, or was it fueled by jealousy and resentment? One thing is certain: lies will always unravel. The more you try to manipulate the truth, the more it slips through your fingers. This story is a chilling reminder that our choices have consequences. Whether it was rage, passion, or something deeper that led to Randall's death, one moment of violence changed multiple lives forever. What do you think? Did Leria deserve a harsher sentence? Or was justice served? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more true crime stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.